es algo que atraviesa el alma, es un sentimiento que no se te va.
Well, hi there to you, and thank you for watching today's program of Catholic Magazine. That's right, we do have a very, very special guest with us on our program today. It is with pleasure that we bid a very warm welcome back to our dear Father Dermot Preston. Of course, just a quick background, Father would have departed these shores a few years ago, has returned just about 2 times since, so it's good that we have the opportunity to catch up with you, Father. You're looking well. What did we miss between 2006 to now? Well, 2010 since you left to now?
Oh, well, I guess, no, I've been having far more cold than I've been here. So it's actually coming back to the humidity is a big change, actually.
And of course, your natural love for our country.
Oh, well, of course, except for the mosquitoes, I love it.
All right, Father, you are the provincial for Jesuits in Britain, Guyana, South Africa. We were very blessed when we heard, saddened but blessed at the same time, that you were going to leave us several years ago. Since then, what have you been up to? How has that appointment been for you?
Well, the job of provincial is kind of not unlike the one I was doing here as regional superior, which was responsibility for all of the Jesuits in Guyana, working in Guyana. And here there are about 25 to 30 men working in the interior on the coast, and some scattered in different parts doing study. The role of the provincial in Britain was doing the similar thing, except it's a far larger number, so it's about 200 men scattered over, mostly in Britain, in England, Wales and Scotland, and then with an oversight of the men working in Guyana and South Africa. So it's a job looking after the Jesuits, finding out the works that they're doing and maybe the works that they should be doing, and so planning in that way. So it's a job for 6 years as well. So at the end of 6 years' time, then off you are back to the ranks.
So you're at what? You're one third of your tenure?
Almost halfway through now. So I've done 2.5 years out of 6. So so I'm getting now. Having done 2.5 years, I'm getting a little bit of a knowledge about the scope of the work. It takes a long time to do it, to get into the nitty-gritty of the parishes and the retreat houses and the colleges that are there as well.
How do you then measure the work, the contribution of 200 men serving different parts of the world?
It's a good question. How do you do that? I suppose success is not necessarily a good measure of it. There's an intuitive nature. I suppose what the task of every Jesuit, every Catholic priest, brother, sister in the Catholic Church is to build the kingdom of God. Now, how you do that can differ in different parts of the world. Some parts of the world it's education. You need to do educational things, working in schools and universities. At other times, if in a country which is in real need of civil rights, the building of the kingdom of God may not be in so much in sacramental work, but it can be in preaching the good news for legal rights for human beings who are really being denied those. So Jesuits in different parts of the world will focus on different aspects to be able to build that kingdom.
All right, let's zero in a little bit on your experience in Guyana. You would have, prior to taking up the appointment as the provincial, you were the regional superior, and that meant looking after and overseeing our Jesuits here. But also you were, as a Jesuit yourself, serving across our nation. Let's go back a bit and share those experiences. How was that for you?
It was a very engaging time. I was sent here with little experience of Guyana. I'd only visited twice in a role which was to come to help sort out some things that were going on here. So it was all a bit new. But it was a very engaging time because it threw me into the deep end of quite a different church. I'd had some experience of church in Africa because I'd worked in South Africa for 7 years. And then I'd worked in Britain in different roles. But to come to Guyana, it was quite different. It's a small country but spread over a huge area, and the people with that very multicultural background is also quite unusual in the world. The mixture of races, especially Africans and Indians, and then Amerindians in the interior, which are all quite different to even the neighbouring countries to Guyana. So that took quite a while just to be able to get into that and get into that mindset. And so it was, it's a very, in many ways, it's a very relaxed country. And so you got to kind of meet the speed that is there in a particular country. Whereas, say, like a city like Johannesburg in South Africa, it's very active, very powerful, moves very quickly. Whereas the tempo in Guyana is, again, quite different.
Was it always based on your knowledge of this part of the world or third world countries? Has church always been just a part, or was it more prevalent in what was taking place in a country?
Strangely, in South Africa, in Britain, and in Guyana, the percentage of Catholics in those countries is all about the same. It's about 10%, 9 to 10%. So the Catholic Church is always a minority in those countries. Whereas in a place like Ireland or in Poland, they're very strongly Catholic, and so that has a very strong influence on a country. So here in Guyana, in some ways, with about 10% of a Catholic Church, it means that church is always interacting with other Christian groups, like the Methodists, the Anglicans, and then in Guyana in particular, a very strong Hindu tradition and Muslim tradition as well. So I suppose from that point of view, the church is always relatively small, not very strong, either politically or influentially, as it could be in Ireland, where the church was very politically strong. Here, I suppose, if it has influence, it hopefully has an influence in terms of an ethics and the preaching of the good news, which is influential more hopefully by example.
Mm-hmm. So there's that avenue for growth. We could be a little stronger. Church can be stronger.
Oh yes, I think we can always be stronger. Again, not necessarily stronger in power. I think most people hear the good news because they see the way that Christians act. And if Christians act with integrity, if Christians act with courage, then I think others see that, and they can see, well, the good news is active in the heart of another human being, and so they can kind of, in one way, the good news is preached by the actions rather than the words. And I think that's one thing that in all countries in which we are, and I don't think Guyana is any different to that. I think in our lives we can be people of greater integrity. And I look at myself and I can see, there's a lot of things that the preaching that I may do doesn't match with my life, and part of my life's journey is to try to make sure that those two come together. So what I say is how I act in my life. Otherwise, I become hypocritical if there's a big gap between those two.
Do what I do as I say, but not as I do, sort of scenario.
That's right. That
all
could
right.
be a disaster. That's right.
You're still watching an interview that we are very happy to be engaging Father Dermot Preston, provincial for the Jesuits in Britain, Guyana, and South Africa. Just here for a few days, but here at a very, very special time in the Church's year. We're just about the midpoint for our Lenten season, heading closer to Easter. Father Preston, of course, apart from your administrative responsibilities, you are a priest at heart, ordained since 1990. Share with us a bit about how you still engage in your priestly activities. What does that entail for you? What goes into your preparations of your sermons and so forth? How is it that you can just go to, whether it's South Africa, you've come here to Guyana, you're going to head back to Britain and so on. How do you still build God's kingdom, or all these places that you get a chance to visit? How do you engage the persons that you will meet in a community in church, even though it's probably just for a short period of time? How do you make that impact as a priest?
I think there's I suppose most of my work as a provincial tends to be working with individual Jesuits. So if there's a priest who's working in a parish or in a retreat house or in a school, or my task is to talk with them in quite depth, which is a form of spiritual direction. You end up doing a lot of spiritual direction with Jesuits, hearing what their story is, seeing the challenges that are in their lives, giving some thoughts and suggestions to their next step. So I suppose my priestly ministry in the last few years has been primarily doing that. I don't work in a parish so much. I visit parishes that we have, and occasionally then would say Mass in a parish or in a school. But most of my work tends to be one-to-one now, with a few talks every now and then. Now, I suppose that's in terms of my priestly ministry, I suppose that's the one where I feel most comfortable, just in that one-to-one talking. And it's a real privilege, because to somebody, whether it's a Jesuit or a layperson, another religious, or somebody you meet, there's something there about being welcomed into their life, welcomed into their story. It's a really precious thing for somebody to open up their story to you and draw you in, tell you that story, and allow you really to interact with them and see the Spirit of God working at quite different levels within their heart. And I suppose that's really where most of my priestly ministry is at the moment, just by the very nature of it. Here, when I was in Guyana, there was a greater mixture of things. There was individual work with the Jesuits and people in spiritual direction, but also quite a lot of work in terms of saying Masses and going around and helping with seminars in the interior and that. But my present work, because there are so many Jesuits, it tends to be one-to-one individual work.
Can you say that you know all 200?
I know them at different levels. Some I know very well. I've known them over the years. Some of them I work with over the years. Some of them, since becoming provincial, it's the first time that I really had a sit-down conversation with them. Now I'm almost 3 years through, so I've met all of the guys in the province on 3 occasions for about an hour and a half each time. So I've got to know them far better. So I think I know everybody in the province now. Not all at great depth, but most of them with a reasonable knowledge. And most of them are very, very open. It's remarkable, really. It's a real privilege to be in a position where you go, and I may be a stranger to them, and yet they open their hearts to allow me to do my job, to be able to sort of say where the challenges are, where the good things and bad things are. So it is a real privilege listening to the Spirit of God working in people.
And these are 200 priests who are not necessarily from the areas that they're serving in. Different cultures, different backgrounds, different countries. How are they coping in a very general sense, though? What is your sense of their adaptation to the territories they're serving in?
Most of them are remarkably adaptable. There's young and old, and from all sorts of different cultures. Take, for example, somebody that people in Guyana would remember would be Father Derek Maitland. Father Derek worked many years in different parts of the interior, and then Bartica, and then Babis, and also here in Georgetown. Now, he's quite old now, almost totally blind, but still very cheery in heart. He's in a community down in the south of England, and yet still bubbles with energy. He's facing the challenge of old age. He's facing the challenge of death. And yet he's doing that in a remarkable way, really. And so for somebody like Derek to have been born in Britain, joined the Royal Air Force, then came out about almost 50 years ago to Guyana, worked here for 40 years, he's adapting himself constantly into those environments, and even adapted himself back into Britain. So it's I suppose it's a flexibility of heart to be able to do that. There are some who are very kind of tight, and they have no flexibility, and that's not good, because they'll find that it'd be very difficult for them to adapt. whereas somebody like Derek, he's one example, but there are other ones as well, and there's some in the region who are really remarkable men as well.
And I'm sure you also persons must have said this about you in different contexts, of course. Being a remarkable person, having that bubbly spirit and the energy about yourself. That's why it was met with a bit of sadness when we heard that you were going to leave. So many persons were touched by your ability. And so we're happy that your work, that you're able to do this wherever you are, and I suppose that's how it goes for all of our Jesuits. Since being a priest back in 1990, Father Preston, if you were to be given another chance to go back to 1990 and say, well, is there something else that you would do besides being a priest? Would you take another option?
No, because I think the ordination to priesthood is in one way, it's only a marker on the journey. I think any vocation, whether it's a priest or a monk or a sister or to be married or even vocational things like being a doctor or a lawyer or those journeys actually start a long way back. So I suppose when I was ordained, I was about 32. But I suppose that pilgrimage started when I was about 7. So the ordination part was actually the one step on that journey. So no, I think I wouldn't have guessed in 1990 where I would be being sent and where I would be going to work. But I wouldn't change that. There's a calling to that, which is partly based with a relationship with God. I think fully based on the relationship with God. It's an element of feeling called. I think that's a very strong thing within Christian kind of in our Christian theology, is that God has a personality and God calls, and God has a relationship, and that relationship is prayer. And so in one way, there's an element of feeling, well, God is calling. I can feel there are certain ways I would like to go and certain lives that it would be interesting and attractive to follow. But feeling that, no, well, God's calling you this way, then, okay, throw your lot in with that and that's part of the journey.
Well, we're glad that you took that, you listened to that call at the tender age of 7, because you wouldn't be here with us today if you didn't listen to that call. We're still chatting with Father Dermot Preston on this program of Catholic Magazine. There's no doubt, Father, that the Church, the world over, would have received some amount of battering, but since Pope Francis came to light and his work, the Church has been going through quite a revolution. What is your take on all of what Pope Francis has been doing, has been saying? How has the Church changed since he assumed the leadership of the Church?
It's a remarkable change, really. Not that the doctrines have changed. I say, all of the things which are there as part of our faith, they're all there. But what he's done, he seems to have, totally unexpectedly, changed the tenor, the texture of the Church. I think he's partly through his own personality experience, he's kind of changed the focus of the way that the Church is looking. I think during the last years of Pope Benedict, it was a Church that was being battered from a number of different directions, not necessarily for bad reasons as well. I think the Church was the Church, like any institution, can get caught up in itself, because each institution is made up of human beings, and human beings all in some ways are caught up with original sin, and so we have a tendency to to create things which can move back to a form of selfishness. And the Church is an institution divinely inspired.